The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman smelled like burnt coffee and men staring down their own mortality. Major Thomas Caldwell stood at the front, one hand pressed flat against a satellite image pinned to the plywood wall. The other hand held a red marker, tracing invisible routes across terrain that looked, from above, like the surface of a dead planet. Khalid Nazari, Caldwell said. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Logistics coordinator, moves weapons across the Pakistan border like FedEx moves packages. We've been hunting this man for 11 months. Every time we get close, he vanishes. 32 people sat in folding chairs that had been arranged in uneven rows. 28 of them were Navy SEALs, men who moved through the world with the quiet confidence of predators who had never met anything they couldn't kill. The other 4 were support personnel, satellite imagery analysts, a communications specialist, and one recon sniper who sat in the very last row, so still and so silent that most people forgot she was breathing. Lieutenant Elena Price was 27 years old, 5'5", 126 pounds, brown hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache, gray eyes that rarely blinked when she was studying something, which was almost always. Her face was forgettable, not ugly, not striking, just quiet enough to vanish even when she was sitting 3 feet away from you. We have a 72-hour window, Caldwell continued, tapping the map with the marker. Nazari is moving through a village called Darwan, southeast Paktia province, Shahikot Valley. Intelligence says he'll be there between 0600 and 0800 tomorrow morning. Commander Jake Harrison sat in the second row, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of hardwood. 37 years old, blonde hair buzzed to stubble, a jaw that could have been used as a ledge. 11 years in special operations, 4 combat deployments, 2 men lost in his entire career, and both their names were tattooed on his left forearm, where he could see them every time he checked his watch. "What's the force package?" Harrison asked. His voice had the texture of gravel being poured slowly from a bucket. 28 operators, 2 Chinook insertion, 12 clicks out. You hump in under darkness, establish observation positions, confirm Nazari's presence, then capture or eliminate. Standard counterinsurgency package. Caldwell glanced down at his roster, flipping through pages clipped to a weathered clipboard. His eyes found a name near the bottom of the list. Recon element. Lieutenant Price will establish overwatch 300 meters behind your main body. Provide eyes on approach routes. In the back of the room, Elena didn't look up from her notebook. She'd heard her name said that way before. An afterthought. A box to check. Not important, but necessary to complete the paperwork. She was used to it. "Questions?" Caldwell asked. Silence filled the room, the weighted kind that happens when everyone has already decided what they think and doesn't want to waste breath saying it out loud. "Good. Wheels up at 0200. Get your gear squared away." The room emptied in 90 seconds. 28 SEALs filed out like a machine, disassembling itself into component parts, each man knowing exactly where he needed to be and how long it would take him to get there. Elena waited until the last one had left before she stood, closed her notebook, and walked toward the door. "Lieutenant," she stopped, turned. Captain David Reynolds stood near the front of the room, arms folded, watching her with the expression of a man evaluating livestock at an auction. 34 years old, tactical coordinator, the officer who had risen through the ranks by being good at paperwork and better at telling people what they wanted to hear. "Yes, sir?" "This is a straightforward recon mission. You maintain position. You observe. You report. Nothing creative. Nothing outside your lane. Understand?" Elena held his gaze. "Yes, sir." "You know why I'm saying this?" "No, sir." Reynolds smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just teeth. "Because last year you filed a report about an IED on Route Falcon, shut down an entire convoy for 6 hours, turned out to be a goat carcass in some trash bags. Elena's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. Sir, with respect, that report saved 4 lives. The carcass was rigged. EOD confirmed it. EOD also confirmed that Lieutenant Morrison was the one who spotted it first. You were just backing up his assessment. That was a lie. Elena had spotted it. Elena had called it in. Morrison had been 50 meters behind her, looking at his GPS. But the after-action report had Morrison's name at the top because Morrison was a man and Elena was not. And in the moral geometry of the United States Army, that meant Morrison got credit and Elena got told to stay in her lane. She didn't argue. There was no point. Understood, sir, she said. Reynolds nodded, satisfied. Good. Don't make me regret putting you out there. Elena left the room. Outside, the Afghan sun was a white hammer beating down on corrugated metal roofs and plywood walls. The temperature was 112 degrees. The air tasted like dust and diesel fuel, and the particular emptiness that comes from being 8,000 miles away from anything that feels like home. Elena walked across the compound toward the armory. Around her, men moved with purpose, checking gear, loading magazines, talking in low voices about fire patterns and approach vectors, and all the small, specific details that kept people alive when the shooting started. Nobody looked at her. She was Whisper, the silent one, the recon girl who sat on ridges and called in numbers and never got to take the shots that mattered. She'd been Whisper for 4 years. The memory came without permission, the way memories always do when you're trying hardest not to think about them. Montana, 20 years ago. A hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and the chemical sweetness of a body shutting down one system at a time. Elena was 7 years old, small for her age. Dark hair in 2 braids her father had tied that morning because her mother's hands didn't work anymore. She sat in a chair next to the bed, holding her mother's hand, which felt like paper and bone and almost nothing else. Sarah Price had been beautiful once. Elena had seen the pictures. Her mother standing on a mountaintop with her arms spread wide, smiling like she owned the sky. Her mother at a campfire, guitar across her lap, singing something Elena was too young to remember. Her mother young and strong and alive in ways that seemed impossible now. The cancer had taken all of that. Left behind a woman who weighed 89 pounds and couldn't lift her head off the pillow without help. Elena, her mother whispered. The word came out broken, like something that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. I'm here, Mom. Listen. Sarah's eyes were still bright, even if nothing else was. Gray eyes, just like Elena's. The only thing Elena had inherited that she actually wanted. The world is going to try to make you quiet. It tries to make all women quiet. I know, but you can't let it. Sarah's grip tightened, surprising strength from fingers that looked like they might snap. You be loud when it matters, baby. You be loud when it counts. Promise me. Elena's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded. Say it. I promise. Her mother died 3 weeks later. At the funeral, Elena stood next to her father and didn't cry. She'd learned the first rule then. Tears made people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people left you alone. And being alone was the worst thing Elena could imagine. So she stayed quiet. For 20 years. But she remembered the promise. The range was empty when Elena arrived. 200 meters of dirt and heat shimmer. Targets set at intervals from 100 meters out to 1,200. She found her rifle in the armory, signed it out with her name and serial number, and carried it to the firing line like it was something sacred. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system weighed 15.3 pounds, 30 inches long, 7.62 millimeter rounds. Effective range 1,200 meters in good conditions. It was the rifle the Army gave to people it didn't quite trust with the expensive guns. Elena settled into position, prone, elbows down, cheek to the stock. She could do this in her sleep. Had done it in her sleep, actually, more than once, waking up with her arms positioned like she was holding a weapon that wasn't there. The target was 800 meters out. Wind from the northwest, gusting maybe 30 kilometers per hour. She adjusted the scope, breathed in, breathed out, found the space between heartbeats where the world went still and the crosshair stopped moving. She squeezed. The rifle kicked. The bullet flew. 800 meters later, it punched through the center of the target with a sound like paper tearing. Not bad. Elena didn't flinch. She'd heard him coming. Sergeant Major William Garrett moved like a man who'd spent 40 years learning how to be quiet in places where being loud got you killed. 64 years old, 5'8", built like a bridge piling, all compression and no give. Gray hair cropped military short, a face carved from old leather and left in the sun too long. "Bull," Elena said. She didn't sit up, didn't take her eye from the scope. "What are you doing here?" "Heard you were deploying, came to say goodbye." "I'll be back in 72 hours. "Maybe." Bull knelt beside her, joints popping like kindling. "Or maybe you won't. That's why I'm here." Elena finally sat up, resting the rifle across her knees. She looked at the old man. Bull Garrett had taught her how to shoot when she was 15 years old. Not the basic mechanics. Her father had done that. But the deeper things. The things that separated good shooters from great ones. The things that couldn't be learned from books or drills or range time. Bull had been kicked out of the Army 8 years ago. Not dishonorably, just out. Too old. Past mandatory retirement age. The military had thanked him for 40 years of service and then escorted him off base like he was a security risk instead of a man who'd trained 200 snipers, most of whom were still alive because of what he'd taught them. He'd been bitter about it for exactly 1 year. Then he'd found Elena on a civilian range in Fort Benton, Montana, and watched her put 5 rounds through a target at 600 meters in wind that should have made it impossible. "You're calculating it wrong," he'd said, walking up to her like they were old friends. "Excuse me?" "The wind. You're seeing it. You need to hear it." "Hear it?" Bull had tapped his ear. "Close your eyes. Tell me what you hear." Elena had thought he was crazy, but she'd closed her eyes anyway. And that's when she heard it, the low, oscillating hum, a frequency somewhere between 40 and 60 hertz, the sound of air moving over terrain in patterns that visual observation alone would never catch. "Now open your eyes. Calculate for what you heard, not what you saw." She'd fired. The bullet had gone exactly where she wanted it to go. Bull had smiled. "I've trained 200 snipers in 40 years. You're the first one who could do that on the first try." He trained her for 3 years after that. Not officially, just training. On weekends, during leave. Every technique he knew, every trick he'd learned, everything the Army had kicked him out before he could pass on to the next generation. Now he was 64, and Elena was 27, and they were sitting on a range in Afghanistan. And in 6 hours, she was going to walk into terrain that might kill her. "You ready?" Bull asked. "I don't know." "Good. If you thought you were ready, I'd be worried." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A compass. Old. Brass casing, worn smooth from decades of handling. "This was mine in Vietnam. Kept me alive through 3 tours. I want you to have it." "Bull, I can't." "You can, and you will." He pressed it into her hand. "Sometimes the mission isn't what you think it is. Sometimes it's something else, something you can't plan for. When that happens, this will remind you that you know how to find your way." Elena looked down at the compass. The needle swung lazily, finding north, finding home, finding the one true direction in a world that didn't offer many. "Thank you," she whispered. Bull stood, his knees cracked again. He looked down at her, and his expression softened in a way she'd only seen a few times. "Your mother would be proud of you." Elena's throat tightened. "You didn't know her." "No, but I know you, and that's enough." He started to walk away, then stopped. "One more thing. You remember what I told you about the impossible shot? That sometimes it's the only shot." Exactly. If things go wrong out there, if you find yourself facing something everyone says can't be done, you remember that. The impossible shot is the only shot, and you're the only one who can take it. Then he was gone, walking across the range toward the compound gate, and Elena sat alone with a rifle and a compass, and the weight of a promise she'd made to a dying woman 20 years ago. The Chinooks lifted off at 0200 exactly. 2 helicopters, 14 men each, plus crew. The noise was apocalyptic, a physical thing that rattled teeth and made thought impossible. Elena sat near the rear ramp, rifle between her knees, watching Afghanistan scroll by beneath them to the gap in the metal. Mountains, endless mountains, ridges and valleys and terrain so hostile, it looked like God had taken a hammer to the world just to see what would break, where civilizations came to die, where empires learned the difference between conquest and survival. She'd been here for 8 months. Sometimes it felt like 8 years. Sometimes it felt like 8 minutes. Time moved differently in war zones, slower and faster at the same time. Days that lasted forever, weeks that vanished into nothing. Petty Officer Marcus Chen sat across from her, 23 years old, freckled, red hair growing out past regulation length because they were too far forward for anyone to care. He'd been her spotter for 4 months. Good kid, smart, quick with numbers, nervous in the way that people who'd never been shot at were always nervous before they got shot at the first time. He leaned across the gap between them, shouting over the rotor noise. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't here?" Elena looked at him. "What? Like, if you hadn't joined up, what would you be doing?" It wasn't a question she thought about much. The decision to join had been made when she was 18, standing in a recruiter's office with her father's hand on her shoulder and her mother's voice in her head saying, "Be loud when it matters." "I don't know," she shouted back. "Maybe teaching, maybe climbing mountains." "You climb?" "Since I was 8. "Shit," Marcus grinned. "That's badass. I can barely climb stairs." "It's just practice, same as anything else." "Why'd you join?" Marcus asked. "You could have been anything. Teacher, doctor, mountain guide. Why this?" Elena looked out at the darkness. Afghanistan scrolled by like a film reel of things dying. She thought about her answer for a long time. "My mom died when I was 7, she finally said. "Cancer. Before she died, she told me to be loud when it matters. I've spent 20 years trying to figure out when that is. Thought maybe the military would teach me." "Did it?" "Not yet." The helicopter banked. The crew chief signaled 2 minutes. Elena checked her gear, rifle, ammunition, water, radio, everything she needed to sit on a ridge and watch people die from a safe distance. She was still trying to figure out if safe distance was cowardice or just common sense. They hit the ground at 0247, 2 Chinooks dropping into terrain that looked like the bones of a dead giant. Rocks and dust and darkness so complete it felt like being underwater. 28 SEALs formed up without needing to be told. A machine assembling itself, each piece knowing exactly where it belonged. Commander Harrison took point. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks held the middle. Sergeant Cole Martinez ran rear security. The formation moved through the night like a single organism, quiet and purposeful, and utterly confident in its own lethality. Elena split off with Marcus, moving northeast toward their overwatch position. 300 meters behind the main element. High ground, good sight lines. A position that kept you safe and useless in equal measure. The terrain was worse than the satellite images had suggested. Loose shale, hidden ravines, rocks that looked stable and then shifted underfoot, with the grinding sound of a world trying to kill you slowly. They moved for 90 minutes, climbing carefully, testing every step. The valley opened below them just before dawn. Darwan Village, 40 structures clustered around a dry riverbed. Mud brick walls, flat roofs. Narrow alleys that wound between buildings like capillaries. A place where people had lived and died for 1,000 years, long before America existed, and long after it would collapse into whatever came next. Elena and Marcus settled into position on a low ridge. She set up the M110, deployed the bipod, and settled in behind the scope. Marcus pulled out his spotting scope and began the slow, methodical work of mapping the village. The sky was going gray. Not dawn yet, but close. That thin, dangerous light when the world was neither dark nor bright, when shadows did strange things and distance became impossible to judge. Through the scope, Elena watched the village come to life. A woman emerged from one of the compounds, carrying a clay jug toward the well. Two children appeared in an alley, kicking something that might have been a ball. Three men gathered outside the small mosque, talking, gesturing, doing all the things men in Afghan villages did every morning while the world pretended it wasn't always on the edge of violence. Elena watched them for 5 minutes, then 10. Her breathing slowed. Her mind went quiet. This was the part of the job she was good at, the watching, the patience, the ability to sit absolutely still while her body screamed at her to move. But something was wrong. She couldn't name it at first. Just a feeling, an itch at the base of her skull that said, "Pay attention, something here doesn't fit." The woman at the well made her third trip to her compound. Elena watched the route, watched the timing, watched the way she moved. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Yeah?" "The woman at the well, how many times has she filled her jug?" Marcus swung his scope, watched. "3 times, why?" "Same route, same timing. Watch the kids." They watched. The children were kicking the ball in a rough circle, staying within a defined perimeter. When they drifted too far, they doubled back, starting the pattern over. "They're on a loop," Marcus whispered. "Yeah. Why would they be on a loop?" Elena adjusted her scope, scanning the rest of the village. The men outside the mosque weren't having a conversation. They were performing one. Big gestures, exaggerated movements, the body language of people who were acting instead of living. "It's staged," Elena said. Her mouth had gone dry. "The whole village is staged." "Why?" "To make it look normal from a distance, to make us think it's safe." She reached for her radio, keyed the transmit button. "Command Recon 3, village activity patterns appear staged. Recommend holding main element for enhanced surveillance before advance." Static. Then Captain Reynolds' voice, tight with irritation. "Recon 3, command. Negative. Your assessment is noted. Maintain position and observe." "Sir, the patterns are consistent with rehearsed." "Recon 3, I said maintain position. Do not clutter the command net with speculation. Command out." The radio went dead. Elena lowered it slowly. Her jaw was clenched so hard her teeth hurt. "He's not listening," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. He never does. Through the scope, Elena watched the SEAL element advance into the valley mouth. 28 men moving in tactical formation through boulder-strewn terrain, heading toward a narrow gorge between 2 rocky ridges. Then she saw it, a flash of reflected light on the eastern ridge. Brief, sharp, the glint of glass or metal catching early sun. She swung her scope toward it. Nothing, just rocks and shadow. Then another flash, western ridge this time, different position, different angle, and a third, higher up, almost directly above the route the SEALs were taking. Elena's hands went cold on the rifle. "Command, Recon 3. Her voice was urgent now, stripped of protocol politeness. "I have multiple possible hostile positions on high ground, East Ridge, West Ridge, and elevated center. Confirmed metallic signatures. Recommend immediate halt and reassessment. This is a kill zone." The response came back like a door slamming. "Recon 3, command. We have no confirmed hostiles on any sensor platform. You are observing reflected minerals or equipment glare. Maintain position. Maintain radio discipline. Command out." Elena lowered the radio. Her heart was hammering. "He's going to get them killed," she whispered. What do we do? Elena watched the SEAL element move deeper into the valley. The terrain was funneling them. The two ridges narrowed like the sides of a V, pushing the formation toward the gorge mouth. Classic ambush geometry. Any first-year tactical student could see it, but she was Whisper, the quiet one, the recon girl with the spotting scope, and Captain Reynolds had made his decision. "We watch," Elena said. The words tasted like ash. The first mortar round landed at 0647. It hit 30 meters ahead of the lead element with a detonation that punched a shockwave through the valley. Before the echo died, two more rounds bracketed the formation. One left, one right, perfectly placed to drive the SEALs toward the only available cover, the gorge. Then the machine guns opened up. Three positions: East Ridge, West Ridge, elevated center, exactly where Elena had reported metallic signatures 9 minutes earlier. Coordinated fire, pre-registered, every burst designed to herd rather than kill. The enemy wasn't trying to wipe them out immediately, they were pushing them into the box. "Oh God," Marcus whispered. "Oh Jesus Christ." Elena watched through her scope as the SEALs executed their immediate action drill. Textbook. But the perimeter kept shrinking. Every mortar round drove them deeper into the gorge. Every machine gun burst closed another avenue of retreat. Within 4 minutes, 28 of America's most elite warriors were compressed into a rocky depression barely 70 meters wide. "All units, command!" Commander Harrison's voice erupted through the radio, tight with controlled urgency. "We are in heavy contact. Multiple enemy positions east, west, and elevated. Estimate 200+ combatants. Requesting immediate close air support." The transmission cut to static. Elena tried her own radio. Dead. Every frequency. Nothing but the empty hiss of jammed airwaves. "They've got military-grade jammers," she said. "They planned this, every step." Marcus's face had gone white. 200? Did he say 200? At least. And we can't call anyone. No. Marcus looked at her. In his eyes, she saw the math that every operator learns to do and prays they never have to. 28 men, 200+ enemy. No communications, no air support, ammunition finite and draining fast. "They're going to die down there," Marcus said. Elena didn't answer. She was already pulling out her tactical map. In the gorge, Commander Harrison pressed his back against a boulder and wiped blood from his left eye. Shrapnel from an RPG near miss had opened a cut above his eyebrow. The blood kept running into his vision, no matter how many times he cleared it. "East Ridge, 30+ movers advancing in pairs," Brooks shouted from behind a rock 10 meters away. His rifle barrel was so hot, the air above it was shimmering. "They've got our range dialed, Commander. Every time we shift, they adjust within seconds." "West flank's worse," Martinez called. "I count 40 on that side. Leapfrogging forward. Disciplined. These aren't local militia. These guys have training." Harrison could see it now. The whole picture. They'd been herded, funneled, pushed into terrain that gave them exactly two choices: die where they stood, or die trying to escape through positions the enemy had already prepared. It was perfect. Beautiful, in the way that death is sometimes beautiful when someone has spent weeks planning exactly how to make it happen. "Webb!" Harrison yelled toward Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, who was hunched over the radio equipment behind a low rock wall. "Comms! Dead across all frequencies, sir. Military-grade jammers somewhere above us. I can't punch through. We're cut off." An RPG streaked overhead and detonated against the cliff face. The explosion sent a curtain of rock fragments raining down. Someone screamed. Petty Officer Jake Patterson clutching his right leg. Blood was pulsing through his fingers in rhythmic spurts that meant arterial damage. Specialist Laura Torres was on him in seconds, hands moving with mechanical precision. She got a tourniquet on, got pressure applied, got Patterson stabilized. Then she looked up at Harrison, and the expression on her face said everything her mouth didn't. "How long?" Harrison asked quietly. 40 minutes, maybe. He needs a surgeon, Commander, not a medic with a first aid kit." Harrison looked at Patterson, 27 years old, married, wife pregnant, 3 weeks from her due date, a man who sent pictures home every week and called his wife every time the satellite connection was strong enough. Now he was bleeding out in a gorge 8,000 miles from anyone who loved him. "Who else?" Harrison asked. "Peters took shrapnel in the shoulder. He can still fight, but he's losing blood. Kowalski's got a concussion from the first mortar. He's seeing double. And Foster," she hesitated. "Foster needs to stop moving, but he won't." Harrison looked across the gorge at Corporal Danny Foster, 22 years old, first deployment. He'd been so excited during the briefing that he'd asked 3 questions about terrain. Now he was firing from a prone position, despite the dark stains spreading across his left side. The kid was dying and he was still fighting. Lieutenant Brooks appeared at Harrison's shoulder, close enough to speak without shouting. His face was the face of a man delivering a death sentence. "The boys know, sir." "I know they know. Morrison's doing the ammo count. We've got maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire. After that, we're throwing rocks." Harrison closed his eyes for 1 second. "We'll complete it. They'll pour fire from every direction simultaneously. We won't be able to cover all sectors. What do we do?" Harrison looked at the men around him. Men he'd trained with for years. Men who trusted him enough to follow him into this valley. Men who deserved to see their families again. "We make them pay for every inch of this gorge," Harrison said, loud enough for the nearest operators to hear. "Every round counts. Make them remember this fight for the rest of their lives." Nobody cheered. Nobody made speeches. They were SEALs. They understood exactly what he was saying. They were going to die here, but they were going to die well. 300 meters away and slightly above the valley floor, Elena was on her knees with a map spread across the rocks. Her finger traced contour lines while her mind ran calculations that terrified her. "There's nothing we can do," Marcus said. He wasn't wrong. 2 people with rifles couldn't change the math of 200 against 28. Not from this position, not from this angle. "Maybe not from here," Elena said. "What do you mean?" Her finger stopped on the map. Cliff Formation 22 Alpha. The thin brown contour lines were packed so close together they almost merged. Military cartography's way of saying this is a wall, not a slope. The terrain analysis printed beside it read, "Non-traversable. Class 5 plus vertical exposure. No military application." "No," Marcus said, reading over her shoulder. "No way. That's a sheer cliff. 380 meters of vertical. You die on the first pitch." "Maybe. Definitely." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. "If I get to the top, I have clear sight lines across the entire battlefield. I'd be above every enemy position. They'd have no idea where the fire was coming from, because no one believes that cliff can be climbed. Because it can't be climbed, Elena." Her voice was quiet, but something in it made Marcus stop talking. "Those 28 men down there have 30 minutes to live. The radios are dead. Nobody's coming. Nobody even knows they're in trouble. If I stay here, I watch them die. All of them. Every single one. And if you fall, then I die trying instead of watching." Marcus stared at her. He opened his mouth to argue, closed it, opened it again. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay here. Keep watching the battle. If the jammers go down, if you get any signal at all, even for a second, you call in everything. Every asset. Everything." "And you?" Elena was already stripping her pack. Water, ammunition, 14 rounds for her M110, sidearm with 2 spare magazines, a thin climbing rope, chalk. Everything else got left on the rocks. She checked her rifle, chambered around, looked at Marcus. "If I don't make it, tell them I saw the ambush. Tell them I tried to warn them." Elena, but she was already moving, downslope first, into the shadows. then lateral across broken terrain toward the base of Cliff Formation 22 Alpha. Marcus watched her disappear into the darkness. He was 23 years old, and he just watched someone walk toward almost certain death with the calm of someone who'd already accepted the cost. "God help her," he whispered. "God help all of us." Elena reached the base of Cliff Formation 22 Alpha and looked up. In the darkness, it was a wall of black rising into a sky full of stars. She could hear the wind moaning across its face, a deep, hollow sound like air moving through a cathedral. The kind of sound that made climbers turn around and find easier routes. The kind of sound that said, "This mountain doesn't want you." She pressed her hand flat against the rock. Sandstone. Cold. Gritty. The kind of rock that could hold you or betray you without warning. Loose in places. Solid in others. No way to tell which was which until you committed your weight and found out if the universe was feeling generous. Behind her, maybe a kilometer away, the sound of gunfire echoed through the valley. Continuous now. A wall of noise that meant men were dying, and the math of ammunition versus bodies was approaching zero, fast. She thought about her mother, 7 years old, sitting in that hospital room, making a promise she didn't understand. Be loud when it matters. She'd spent 20 years trying to figure out when that was. Thought maybe it was when you aced your qualifications, when you proved yourself on the range, when you filed perfect reports that nobody read. But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just this. Right now, when 28 people were going to die, unless someone did something everyone said was impossible. Elena found the first handhold, a horizontal crack, solid. She wedged her fingers in, placed her right foot on a small ledge, and pulled herself off the ground. 1 meter, 379 to go. The first 30 meters went as well as darkness and bad rock allowed. Elena climbed the way Bull had taught her. Methodical, patient, always 3 points of contact, always testing before trusting. Her world narrowed to the next handhold, the next foothold, the next 3 feet of vertical progress. She could hear her father's voice from 20 years ago. They'd been on a cliff face in the Bitterroot Range. Elena was 12, scared, 50 feet up and suddenly convinced she couldn't go any higher. "Don't look down," Jack had said from below. "Don't look up. Just look at the rock in front of your face. Read it. It'll tell you where to go." What if it says, "Don't come"? Then you listen to that too. But right now it's saying, "Keep climbing." So climb. Elena climbed. At 40 meters, her right hand closed on a ledge that looked solid. It exploded into fragments. Her body swung outward into open air. One hand, 2 feet scrambling against smooth rock. The valley floor was 130 feet below, far enough that she wouldn't feel the impact. Just a half second of falling, and then nothing. Her right foot caught a tiny ridge. She pressed down. It held. Her left hand found a crack and jammed into it so hard, her knuckles split inside her gloves. She hung there, breathing, 4 stories above the ground, held by a toe and 3 fingers. Below, she could hear the gunfire from the gorge, a sound that had become the metronome of a countdown. Tick, tick, tick. Each burst meant less ammunition, less time, less chance. "Don't stop," she told herself. "They're dying while you hang here. Move." She moved. At 60 meters, the face went smooth, almost polished. She traversed left along a ledge the width of a boot sole, back pressed against the cliff, fingers reading the rock by feel because her eyes couldn't tell solid from hollow in the darkness. The ledge ended at a vertical crack, her only route up, too narrow for her body, barely wide enough for her hands. She wedged her fingers in, placed her feet on either side, and started chimneying upward. Back against one wall, feet against the other, pushing, climbing, forcing her body up through a space that didn't want to let her through. Her shoulders burned within the first 10 meters. The shredded gloves were wet. Sweat or blood, she couldn't tell and didn't care. The crack tore at her knuckles, her palms, her wrists. Every upward meter was a negotiation between muscle and gravity. And gravity was winning. She thought about Bull, about the last thing he'd said to her on the range. Sometimes the impossible shot is the only shot. This wasn't a shot, but it was impossible. And it was the only way. At 90 meters, she found a shallow cave, barely deeper than her body. She crawled into it, pressed against the back wall, and let herself shake. Her arms were trembling so violently she couldn't have gripped a coffee cup. Her shoulders felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through them. Her hands were raw meat inside disintegrating gloves. And she was only halfway up. Through the cave opening, she could see the valley below. The muzzle flashes in the gorge were orange sparks flickering faster and more desperately. The SEALs were burning through their ammunition. 20 minutes, Harrison had said, maybe less. Elena looked at her hands, looked at the rock above, did the math. It was bad math, the kind that didn't balance, the kind where the answer was you're going to fall and there's nothing you can do about it. But she thought about Patterson bleeding out on the rocks, about Foster, 22 years old, dying in his first deployment, about Harrison and all the men who'd followed him into this valley because they trusted him. And she thought about a hospital room 20 years ago, a woman who weighed 89 pounds, whose body was shutting down one system at a time, who used her last breath to tell her daughter, "Be loud when it matters." "This matters, Mom," Elena whispered into the darkness. "If this doesn't matter, nothing does." She pushed herself out of the cave and started climbing again. The universe tried to kill her at 120 meters. The sandstone gave way to shale, loose, fractured, treacherous. Every handhold was a bet, and the odds were getting worse with every meter. Elena moved with extreme care, testing each grip 3 and 4 times before trusting her weight. She was 15 meters from the summit ridge when the shelf beneath her feet simply vanished. One moment she was climbing, the next she was falling. The sensation lasted less than a second before her right hand shot out. Pure reflex, pure survival instinct, pure muscle memory from 20 years of her father throwing challenges at her that seemed impossible until they weren't. Her hand caught a protrusion of rock no bigger than a fist. Her body slammed to a stop. Her shoulder sockets took her full weight with pain so intense, her vision went white. The world became a high-pitched whine, and the sensation of her arm being pulled from its socket, and the certain knowledge that she was about to die alone on a cliff face in Afghanistan, and nobody would ever know what she'd tried to do. The rock under her fingers began to crack. She could hear it, a slow, grinding fracture, like a bone breaking in slow motion. In 2 seconds, maybe 3, it would give way completely. She would fall 120 meters onto jagged rock in total darkness, and no one would ever know. Her left hand reached up, found another hold. Barely there, a shallow depression that wouldn't have held a coffee cup. She pulled, shifted weight off the failing grip. Her right foot found a tiny ledge, inches wide, barely there. The rock under her right hand shattered, but she was already moving, already reaching, already climbing with the desperate animal energy of a body that has decided it is not ready to die. 7 minutes later, 7 minutes that erased every other experience of fear she'd ever known, Elena pulled herself over the summit ridge of Cliff Formation 22 Alpha. She collapsed face down on solid ground. Her body was shaking so hard she thought she might shake apart. Her hands were destroyed, torn gloves, split skin, blood mixing with chalk dust and grit. Her shoulders felt dislocated. Her legs were cramping. She gave herself 15 seconds. Then she crawled to the edge and looked down. The entire battlefield spread below her. The gorge, the ridges, the enemy positions, everything visible, everything exposed. Every fighter who believed he was safe because the cliffs above him were unclimbable. Elena pulled her rifle forward, deployed the bipod between 2 rocks, settled in behind the scope. Through the magnified optic, she could see individual insurgent fighters moving between positions with the confidence of men who had already won. She could see muzzle flashes from the gorge where 28 SEALs were fighting their last fight. She could see the mortar team adjusting for another barrage. The RPG crews preparing their next rounds. The squad leaders positioning their men for the final assault. They had no idea she was here. Nobody knew she was here. Her finger found the trigger. She took one long breath, released half, found the stillness between heartbeats, and she whispered the words Bull had said before every critical shot for 40 years. The words he taught her when she was 15 years old on a range in Montana. Make it count. The enemy sniper on the eastern ridge fired twice more into the gorge before Elena found him through her scope. He was good, disciplined. He moved between three positions with the patience of a man who'd killed before and planned to keep killing all night. 2 shots from one spot. Shift left behind cover. Reappear 10 meters away. Fire again. Every round aimed, not sprayed. Every movement calculated. Through her optic, Elena watched him settle into his third position. He pressed his cheek to the stock, adjusted his scope, began to steady his breathing for the next shot. She didn't know which SEAL he was aiming at. She didn't need to. Range, 851 meters. Wind from the northwest, gusting and swirling unpredictably through the valley. Target elevated roughly 40 meters above her, meaning she needed to compensate for the downward angle. Cold barrel, her first round, the most important and least predictable shot a sniper can take. Elena closed her eyes, listened, found the frequency. That low, oscillating hum between 40 and 60 hertz. The sound of wind moving over terrain in patterns that visual observation alone would never catch. Bull's technique, the thing that separated her from every other sniper who'd ever tried to make this shot. She opened her eyes, adjusted for what she'd heard, not what she'd seen, controlled her breathing, slow inhale, slow release, found the space between heartbeats, that fraction of stillness when the human body stops vibrating and the crosshair holds true. The enemy sniper paused, settled his own breathing, began to squeeze. Elena squeezed first. The M110 kicked against her shoulder. Through the scope, the enemy sniper jerked backward and collapsed behind his rocks. His rifle slid down the slope and came to rest against a boulder. 1. She was already traversing left. Target 2 materialized. A man in tactical gear standing on a rock outcrop, gesturing commands to a squad of fighters below him. His posture screamed authority. Squad leader, maybe higher. He stood exposed because he believed he was beyond the reach of the dying men in the gorge below. Range, 923 meters. She adjusted for the wind shift, placed the crosshair right and high, fired. He dropped like someone had cut his spine. The fighters below him froze. 5 men staring at the empty rock where their commander had been alive 1 second ago. 2. Now confusion rippled through the enemy positions. Elena could see fighters scrambling, heads turning, weapons swinging toward threats that didn't exist. 2 of their best had dropped within 15 seconds. The shots hadn't come from the gorge. The angles were impossible, but there was nothing above them except cliffs that couldn't be climbed. Elena shifted 3 meters left to a different shooting port between the rocks. Target 3. A 2-man PKM machine gun crew on the western ridge, pouring sustained fire into the SEAL perimeter. The gunner's head and shoulders were visible above a hasty sandbag wall. Range, 791 meters. She fired. The gunner slumped forward. The assistant grabbed for the weapon. Elena chambered and fired again before he could get his hands on the trigger mechanism. 4. She could feel something shift in the battle below. A change in rhythm, like a heart skipping a beat. The relentless hammering pressure on the SEAL position suddenly had gaps in it. Through her scope, she watched operators reposition, redistribute ammunition, pull wounded into better cover. They didn't know why the fire had eased, but they knew how to use it. In the gorge, Commander Harrison was experiencing something he hadn't felt in over an hour. Confusion, the good kind. What the hell is happening up there? Brooks shouted, pressing himself against a boulder as he swapped magazines. The Eastern sniper's gone. The Western gun's gone. The mortar's stopped. I have no idea, Harrison said. Someone's shooting at them, Martinez said, crawling toward them with his rifle cradled in his elbows. Single shots. Everyone's a kill. I've been listening between our own fire. Same weapon signature every time. One rifle. One shooter. From where? Martinez pointed upward, toward 22 Alpha, toward the impossible cliff. Harrison looked up into the darkness. Nobody could climb that. Well, Martinez said quietly, somebody did. As if answering him, another crack echoed across the valley. A fighter on the northern ridge pitched sideways and tumbled out of his position. Harrison stared up at the cliff. His mind was doing math that didn't make sense. One person, on top of an unclimbable cliff, systematically dismantling a 200-man ambush force with aimed fire and tactical intelligence. Commander, Martinez's voice dropped. Whoever's up there isn't just shooting, they're selecting targets. I've watched the pattern. They took out the sniper first, then the machine gun, then the mortar crew, then the radio men. This is someone who understands force structure, someone with tactical training. Harrison processed that. One person, tactical training, understanding force structure. And the only recon element positioned anywhere near that cliff was Price, he whispered. Sir, Lieutenant Price, whisper. She was assigned overwatch 300 meters behind us. Brooks stared at him. You think she climbed that? I think someone did, and she's the only one who could have. Another shot. A radio operator on the southern slope dropped his handset and collapsed. Use it, Harrison ordered. I don't care who it is or how they got up there. Redistribute ammo. Consolidate wounded. Move Patterson and Foster to the deepest cover we've got. If this shooter can keep the pressure off for another 20 minutes. Patterson doesn't have 20 minutes, sir. Torres interrupted from where she crouched over the wounded petty officer. Her hands were red to the wrists. I've retightened the tourniquet twice. His blood pressure is crashing. If we don't get him to a surgeon, I know. Sir, the medic held his gaze. Not challenging, just making sure he understood what she was telling him. Harrison understood. 15 minutes for Patterson. Maybe 20 minutes of ammunition. One unknown shooter buying time on a cliff that shouldn't be possible. Pray, Martinez said. No one laughed, because he wasn't joking. 400 meters above them, Elena had stopped praying and started problem solving. She just fired her 10th round. 10 shots, 10 kills, and the battle below was tilting but not breaking. Through her scope, she watched the enemy adapt. Fighters moved to covered positions. They pressed tight against rocks, reduced their profiles, stopped standing in the open. The shouted commands across the valley changed. Less arrogant, more urgent, but still organized. Someone was still holding this force together, and someone was looking for her. Movement on the southern ridge. 3 fighters climbing toward her position. They moved nothing like the random insurgents below. They moved like soldiers. Tactical bounds, cover to cover, proper spacing, rifles up. One moved while 2 covered, then the next, then the next. Leapfrogging up the southern slope with efficiency that came from real training and real combat experience. They'd identified her general position, and they were coming to kill her. 6 minutes, maybe 5. The slope wasn't as steep on the southern approach. That's why it was the obvious route. And that's why she'd set up her position to cover the northern angles instead. A mistake, the kind of mistake that got people killed. Elena made a decision in 2 seconds. She acquired the lead climber through her scope. Range, 409 meters. Closing. He was good, using every shadow, every fold of terrain. But moonlight caught the metal receiver of his rifle for half a heartbeat. Half a heartbeat was enough. She placed the crosshair on the glint and waited for him to pause between movements. He stopped behind a rock, scanned upward, prepared to move again. She fired. He tumbled backward, rolling down the slope. The other two vanished behind cover so fast, it was like watching men dissolve into stone. 11 rounds fired, 11 kills. 3 rounds remaining in this magazine. One more magazine with 8 rounds. 11 total rounds left. And at least 180 enemy fighters still operational. Elena grabbed her rifle and moved. Fast. 40 meters along the ridgeline, staying below the crest, feet finding their way over loose rock in the darkness. She found her secondary position, a different set of boulders, a different angle on the valley. She set up, settled in, found the gorge through her scope. The 2 remaining climbers were still coming. They'd split up, one moving left, one right, flanking, trying to approach her from 2 directions at once. Smart and terrifying. She didn't have time to deal with them yet. Below, the enemy was consolidating. Through her scope, she watched 50 or more fighters gathering in a ravine north of the gorge. Squad leaders were organizing them, building an assault formation, pointing toward the SEAL perimeter, getting ready for a final push that would overrun the gorge with sheer numbers. If that assault launched, it was over. But there was a man standing on a rock, pointing, directing, leading, a natural commander, the kind of man who held other men together through the force of his personality. Elena watched him gesture emphatically toward the gorge, watched fighters respond to his energy, watched the assault take shape around his will. Range, 673 meters. She put her round through his chest. He dropped. The fighters around him scattered, confused, leaderless for the second time in 10 minutes. The assault's momentum shattered. Men who'd been ready to charge suddenly had no one telling them to charge. And without that voice, the individual survival instinct won out over collective aggression. She'd bought the gorge maybe 5 more minutes. 5 minutes of life for 28 men. It was everything she had. Behind her, boots on rock, close, much closer than they should have been. Elena rolled away from her rifle and drew her sidearm in one fluid motion. Muscle memory so deeply embedded it bypassed her conscious mind entirely. Her body was moving before her brain finished processing the sound. The first climber came over a rock formation 12 meters away. His rifle was up, muzzle sweeping the position where she'd been lying half a second before. He was fast, trained, the kind of fighter who'd done this before. But Elena was no longer in that position. She fired 3 times from behind a low boulder. The rounds hit center mass. The climber's legs buckled and he went down hard. His rifle clattered against stone. Movement left, immediate. She threw herself sideways as bullets struck the rocks above her. Sharp, vicious impacts that sent stone fragments slicing across her neck and cheek. She hit the ground, rolled, came up in a crouch behind a different boulder, sidearm extended, breathing hard. Through a narrow gap between rocks, she could see the second climber repositioning. He'd seen her muzzle flash and was moving to flank her. Smooth, professional, dangerous. He was probably better than her at close quarters combat. Bigger, stronger, more experienced in this kind of knife-distance gunfight. But Elena had grown up hunting in the Bitterroot Mountains, and her father had taught her the most important rule of stalking. The prey that moves first dies first. Let the other animal come to you. Let them make the mistake. You just have to be patient enough to wait for it. She waited. 2 seconds. 3. The climber moved 1 step past the gap in the boulders, his rifle leading, sweeping the spot where she'd been. She fired 4 times. He fell against the rocks and slid down. Silence. Wind. The distant roar of combat below. Elena checked for more threats. Nothing. She scrambled back to her rifle, settled in, found the gorge. She'd been off the primary weapon for 90 seconds. In 90 seconds, the world had changed. The enemy assault had launched, not the organized, coordinated push she'd disrupted. This was something worse. Desperate. Angry. The remaining fighters had seen their leaders fall, seen their careful plan disintegrate. And instead of retreating, they'd done what cornered, furious men sometimes do. They charged. Fighters were pouring down both ravines toward the SEAL perimeter. Close range, some within 100 meters. The gorge was a wall of noise. Every SEAL weapon firing continuously. A sound so dense it merged into a single roar. Through her scope, Elena saw Harrison standing upright behind a boulder, firing controlled bursts, moving between positions, directing his men with hand signals because his voice couldn't carry over the gunfire. She saw Martinez dragging a wounded operator behind cover with one arm, while firing his sidearm with the other. She saw Torres crouched over Patterson, hands still pressing a dressing into his leg, still working, still refusing to stop even as rounds cracked off the rocks beside her head. She saw Foster, young Foster, first deployment Foster, firing from a prone position with a dark stain on his left side, now spreading past his belt. He was dying and he was still fighting, and he was 22 years old. Elena began firing. No more careful selection, no more surgical precision. Fast-aimed shots. Acquire, press, chamber. Acquire, press, chamber. A fighter mid-stride 30 meters from the perimeter. He went down and the man behind him stumbled over his body. An RPG gunner who'd shouldered his weapon and was aiming at the rock wall sheltering 5 SEALs. The rocket would have killed them all. He died with his finger on the trigger, and the round went wild into empty sky. The assault wavered. Fighters who'd been running forward suddenly found their comrades dropping from an angle that made no tactical sense, from a direction that didn't exist on their battlefield map. The charge lost momentum. Men dove for cover, unable to process an enemy they couldn't see or locate. Elena's magazine ran dry. She dropped it, slammed her last one home. 8 rounds between 28 men in annihilation. She made every one of them count. A squad leader, standing in the open, screaming at his fighters to keep pushing. He understood that momentum was their only weapon now. He was right, and he died knowing he was right. More fighters, closer now, 70 meters, close enough for the SEALs to engage with their own weapons. But in the chaos, angles got confused. Targets got lost. Elena didn't lose targets. Then she found him, the overall commander of the entire ambush force. He stood on a ridge east of the gorge, surrounded by 3 bodyguards. He was losing control, and he knew it. His operation, weeks of planning, hundreds of fighters, jammers and mortars and coordinated fire plans, was disintegrating around him. Through her scope, Elena could see the desperation in his movements. He grabbed fighters by their vests, shoved them toward the battle, screamed orders that fewer and fewer men were following. Range, 1,147 meters. Elena had 5 rounds left. She'd never made a confirmed kill past 1,000 meters in combat. The range pushed her rifle to its absolute limit. At that distance, the bullet would be in the air for nearly 1.5 seconds. Time enough for the wind to push it a full meter off course. Time enough for the target to scratch his nose, turn his head, take one step in any direction. If she missed, the commander might rally his force. One strong voice could turn a retreat back into an attack. Miss and the SEALs would die. Hit and the enemy might break completely. She settled into her position, forced her breathing to slow despite the adrenaline that made her hands vibrate against the stock. Through the scope, she studied the commander's pattern. He was animated, constant motion, gesturing, shouting, physically pushing men into position. But every 15 seconds or so, a fighter would run up to report. The commander would stop to listen. Maybe 2 seconds of relative stillness, maybe less. 2 seconds at 1,147 meters. Elena closed her eyes, listened, found the wind frequency, that low hum between 40 and 60 hertz. The sound Bull had taught her to hear when she was 15 years old. The technique no one else had. The thing that made impossible shots possible. She opened her eyes. The wind gusted hard from the northwest. She waited. The commander gestured sharply at a group of fighters, shoved one forward. Then a messenger ran up, breathless, pointing toward the southern ridge where Elena had killed the three-man team. The commander turned to listen. 1 second. Elena placed her crosshair high and right of center mass, compensating for distance, wind, elevation, temperature, the rotation of the earth. Everything she knew, everything her father had taught her, everything 10 years of military training had built into her bones and hands and breath. 2 seconds. She fired. The bullet left the barrel at 830 meters per second. It climbed, then fell. The wind pushed it left, then right. At 600 meters, gravity was pulling it earthward hard. At 900, the trajectory was a plunging curve. At 1,147 meters, the bullet arrived. Through the scope, she saw the commander's body snap backward. He crumpled. His bodyguards scrambled to him, hands pressing, heads turning wildly in every direction. But there was nothing to find, nothing to shoot back at, nothing but an unclimbable cliff and a woman the entire military had written off as too small and too quiet to matter. The shouted commands across the valley stopped. For the first time in over an hour, the battlefield went quiet enough for Elena to hear her own heartbeat. And then, beneath that heartbeat, growing louder with every second, another sound. A deep, rhythmic thumping that came from the east. A sound that every soldier in Afghanistan knew, the way a drowning man knows the sound of a thrown rope. Rotors. Helicopter rotors. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold metal of her rifle and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking so hard the weapon rattled against the bipod. She had 4 rounds left. Her gloves were destroyed. Her hands were bleeding. Her shoulders felt like they'd been pulled from their sockets and shoved back in crooked. But that sound. She opened her eyes and looked through the scope one more time. In the gorge, she could see Harrison's head turn eastward. She could see Brooks grab Martinez's arm and point. She could see, even from this distance, even through optics, the moment when 28 men who'd accepted they were going to die realized they might not. And somewhere inside Elena, in the place where fear and exhaustion and the weight of 11 lives had compressed her into something harder than the rock she was lying on, something cracked open. Not relief, not yet. The helicopters were still minutes away, and minutes were lifetimes in this valley. But something. She wiped her eyes with the back of a shredded glove, chambered her second-to-last round, found the valley through her scope again. There were still RPG teams repositioning, still fighters with the means to bring down an aircraft. 4 rounds, 4 more kills between those helicopters in the ground. Elena breathed in, breathed out. "Almost done," she whispered. "Almost done. Hold together." She didn't know if she was talking to the SEALs or to herself. The first Black Hawk cleared the eastern ridgeline at 200 knots. Nose down, rotors chopping the air with a sound that hit the valley like a war drum. The door gunner was already firing before the aircraft leveled out. Tracer rounds arcing into enemy positions on the northern slope. Orange streaks that carved through the darkness. Elena tracked the helicopter through her scope and felt her chest constrict. They were coming in fast, aggressive. The way pilots fly when they know the situation on the ground is desperate. But fast and aggressive also meant exposed. The Black Hawk had to slow down to deploy ropes. Slowing down meant hovering. Hovering over a valley full of RPG teams meant dying. She swung her scope right, northern ridge. An RPG gunner was already kneeling, tube on shoulder, leading the helicopter with his weapon the way a hunter leads a duck. He was tracking the aircraft's approach path, waiting for it to slow. Elena had 4 rounds left. Range, 671 meters. Wind still swirling but lighter now. She placed the crosshair on the RPG gunner's torso and fired. He pitched sideways. The RPG tube clattered against the rocks, unfired. The loader beside him grabbed for the weapon, tried to shoulder it, tried to find the helicopter in his sights. Elena chambered and fired. The loader dropped across his dead partner. 2 rounds left. A second RPG team appeared on the eastern ridge, two men scrambling into position, working with the frantic speed of fighters who knew the helicopters meant the end of everything they'd planned. One man loaded the tube, the other shouldered it and aimed. Elena traversed right. Range, 712 meters. She fired. The gunner dropped. The loader looked up. Not at the sky, not at the gorge, but straight toward the cliff where Elena was lying. For one frozen moment through the scope, their eyes almost met. He knew. He'd figured out where the shots were coming from. She fired her last round. He fell. Empty magazine, empty rifle. 11 rounds fired in the first engagement, 4 rounds in close combat, 11 rounds in the assault, 4 rounds protecting the extraction, 30 rounds total since she'd pulled herself over the summit ridge, 30 enemy fighters dead. Elena lowered her weapon and watched. The descent was the part Elena had been trying not to think about. Going up a cliff in darkness was dangerous. Going down the same cliff with destroyed hands, exhausted muscles, and no rope was something else entirely. The kind of something else that climbing instructors described with the word fatal. But staying wasn't an option. Dawn was coming. When the sun came up, her position on the summit would be visible from every ridge in the valley. Any remaining fighters with binoculars would see her. And then they'd come. Lots of them. Elena stood up. Her legs almost buckled. She locked her knees, waited for the dizziness to pass, walked to the edge of the cliff. Looking down made her stomach drop into her boots. The route she'd climbed was invisible in the darkness. She could see only the first few meters of rock face before it vanished into black. Somewhere down there were the handholds she'd used on the way up. Somewhere down there was the ledge that had crumbled, the crack she'd chimneyed through, the shelf that had collapsed and nearly killed her. She had to go back down through all of it, blind, with hands that couldn't grip a coffee cup. 380 meters, she said to herself. That's all. 380 meters and then flat ground. You've done harder climbs. She hadn't. She'd never done a harder climb in her life, and she'd never attempted a down climb on a route this severe without proper equipment and a partner. But the alternative was dying on this ridge when the sun came up. Elena turned, lowered herself over the edge, and began the descent. The first 50 meters took 40 minutes. She moved by feel, hands searching for holds she remembered from the ascent, feet testing every ledge before committing weight. Her fingers screamed with every grip. The torn skin on her palms reopened, and she could feel blood making the rocks slippery under her ruined gloves. At the chimney crack, she wedged herself in and down-climbed the narrow gap with her back against one wall and her feet against the other. The technique required constant pressure from her shoulders that had already been pushed past their limit by the ascent and 30 shots from a heavy rifle. Halfway down the chimney, her left arm gave out. It didn't cramp. It didn't weaken gradually. It simply stopped working, the muscles reaching some absolute limit and shutting down like a circuit breaker tripping. Her body swung sideways, held only by her feet and her right arm. And for 3 seconds, she hung in the darkness, waiting to see if she was going to fall 200 meters onto rocks. Her feet held. She pressed her back against the wall, took the weight off her arm, waited. 10 seconds, 20. Feeling returned to her left arm, tingling, then pain, then function. She continued down. At the traverse, the ledge barely wider than a boot sole, she moved with the excruciating slowness of someone walking a tightrope over an abyss. Each step was a full commitment, a complete transfer of weight from one foot to the other, with nothing beneath her but darkness and distance. Her right foot slipped, just half an inch, but half an inch on a ledge 4 inches wide is everything. Her body tilted outward, balance shifting toward the void. And for one crystalline instant, she felt herself going. Her left hand shot out and found the rock face, not a hold, just flat stone. But the friction of her bleeding palm against rough sandstone was enough to stop her momentum. She pressed herself flat against the cliff, cheek against cold rock, and breathed. "Not yet," she said through clenched teeth. "Not yet. Not after everything. Not after 30. Not yet." She kept going. The last 30 meters were the worst because they were the easiest. The slope eased enough that a fall wouldn't necessarily kill her. It would just break bones, leave her crippled in a valley full of enemies. The temptation to rush was almost overwhelming. Her body wanted to be done. Her mind wanted solid ground. Every instinct screamed to go faster, to get off this cliff, to stop hurting. She didn't rush. Her father had taught her that more climbers died in the last 10% of a descent than in the rest combined. Tired muscles, false confidence, the mental relaxation that comes from seeing the end, all of it killed. So she moved slowly, dismissed every hold, breathed deliberately, and then her feet touched flat ground. Elena collapsed, not gracefully, not heroically. She simply stopped being vertical and became horizontal, her body hitting the rocky valley floor with a gracelessness that would have been embarrassing if anyone had been watching. She lay there. The stars overhead were starting to fade as dawn approached. The eastern sky had the faintest blush of gray. She gave herself 60 seconds. Then she stood up, oriented herself by the fading stars, and began walking toward the extraction coordinates. She'd covered maybe 200 meters when she heard the rotors again. The Black Hawk appeared over the eastern ridge, moving fast, running lights off. It banked toward her, descended, settled onto a flat area 50 meters ahead, its rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and gravel. A figure jumped from the aircraft before the skids fully touched ground. Commander Harrison. He walked toward her with the deliberate pace of a man approaching something he couldn't quite believe was real. Behind him, Brooks and Martinez dropped from the helicopter and followed. Elena kept walking, one foot in front of the other. She was covered in rock dust and dried blood. Her uniform was torn in a dozen places. Her gloves were hanging off her hands in strips. She was carrying an empty rifle because she'd forgotten to leave it on the ridge, and her sidearm hung at her side with its 2 remaining rounds. Harrison stopped 3 meters in front of her. He stared at her. She stared back. "You," he said. "Sir, you climbed 22 Alpha." "Yes, sir." "In the dark." "Wasn't much choice, sir." Harrison opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "How many, Lieutenant?" 30 confirmed, possibly more I couldn't verify. Behind Harrison, Martinez made a sound. Not a word, not a gasp. Something between the two. The sound a man makes when reality rearranges itself in front of him. 30, Harrison repeated. "Yes, sir." Elena swayed. The ground was tilting. "Permission to sit down, Commander. That climb it was rough." Harrison stepped forward and caught her arm before she could fall. Brooks took her other side. Martinez took her rifle. "Let's go home, Whisper," Harrison said. He'd used the nickname, but his voice had done something to it. Stripped away the mockery, the dismissal, the years of casual cruelty that word had carried. When Harrison said it, it sounded like what it should have been from the beginning. A title earned in blood and darkness, and 30 shots that nobody should have been able to make. They helped her to the helicopter. She sat down on the metal floor, leaned against the bulkhead. Someone, she didn't see who, pressed a canteen into her hands. She drank. The water tasted like the best thing she'd ever put in her mouth. The Black Hawk lifted off. The valley fell away beneath them, the ridges and gorges shrinking to miniature. The place where 28 men almost died, becoming just another fold in the endless Afghan terrain. Elena looked out through the open door. The sun was rising now, painting the peaks gold and red. She could see the shadow of their helicopter moving across the ground below, a dark shape racing over rocks and dust, carrying 6 people away from the worst night of their lives. Martinez sat down across from her. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he said something she never expected to hear from him. "I'm sorry." "For what, Sergeant?" For not seeing you. For 3 deployments, I didn't see you. None of us did. Elena held his gaze. You see me now? Yeah, Martinez nodded slowly. Yeah, I see you now. She closed her eyes. The helicopter's vibration hummed through her body, and the exhaustion she'd been holding at bay for hours finally broke through her defenses, like water through a cracked dam. She was asleep before they crossed the first ridge. She woke up in a hospital bed at Bagram Airfield with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The first thing Elena noticed was her hands. Both were wrapped in clean white bandages from fingertip to wrist, thick enough that her hands looked like boxing gloves. She tried to flex her fingers. The pain that shot through both arms made her suck air through her teeth and drop them back to the mattress. The second thing she noticed was Marcus sitting in a plastic chair beside her bed, asleep, mouth open, patrol cap pulled down over his eyes. Marcus, he jerked awake so fast he nearly fell out of the chair. You're up. Oh, thank God you're up. How long? 18 hours. They gave you something when they brought you in. Elena, you were in bad shape. She looked at her bandaged hands, tried to move them again, failed. What's the damage? Your hands are torn up, both shoulders are strained. You're dehydrated, and you've got cuts all over your face and neck from rock fragments. But the doc says everything heals, nothing permanent. Elena stared at the ceiling. 18 hours. She'd lost 18 hours. Patterson? Marcus's face changed. Not grief, something adjacent to it. Surgery. He's still in surgery. They've been working on him for 7 hours. Torres got the tourniquet on right? Yeah, kept him alive long enough to get to the table. They don't know yet. Foster? Same, surgery. He lost a lot of blood. They're giving him transfusions. Marcus paused. Elena, everyone else is alive, all 28. Injuries across the board, but everyone walked off those helicopters or got carried off breathing. Elena stared at the ceiling. 28 alive. Every number she'd carried on that cliff. Every round she'd fired. Every second she'd bought. It had been enough. The jammers, she said. Did you get through? About 10 minutes after the helicopters arrived, whatever you did up there knocked out enough of their positions that the jamming network collapsed. I got a signal through to Chapman, called in the QRF and the air assets. By the time I got through, the birds were already inbound. He stopped, looked at her with an expression she'd never seen from him before. You did it, Elena. You actually did it. We got lucky. That wasn't luck. 30 confirmed kills from an impossible position in, 90 minutes? That's not luck, that's... He shook his head. I don't know what that is, but it's not luck. A knock at the doorframe. Both of them looked up. Commander Harrison stood in the doorway. He'd changed uniforms, but the cut above his eye was stitched and taped. He moved with the stiffness of a man whose body had been through something it wasn't going to forgive quickly. Behind him stood Martinez and Brooks. Lieutenant, Harrison said, you up for visitors? Yes, sir. Marcus stood and started to leave. Harrison held up a hand. Stay, petty officer. You were part of this. Harrison pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down heavily. Brooks and Martinez stood behind him. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence had weight. The kind of silence that happens when people are trying to find words for something that doesn't fit into words. I need to tell you something, Harrison said, and I need you to hear it. Because in about 3 hours, you're going to be in a briefing room with a full-bird colonel, and things are going to move fast. Sir? Colonel Rebecca Stone, Task Force Vanguard Commander. She's read my preliminary after-action report, all 51 pages of it. She wants to see you personally. Am I being charged? The question landed like a grenade in the small room. Brooks flinched. Martinez looked at the floor. Marcus's face went white. Harrison held her gaze. You disobeyed a direct order to maintain position. You conducted an unauthorized solo movement into hostile terrain. You engaged enemy forces without command authorization. By the book, Elena, by the strict letter of military regulation. He paused. You could be facing a court-martial. I understand that, sir. I'm not finished. Harrison leaned forward. What I wrote in my report is that your actions constituted the single most consequential individual combat performance I have witnessed or studied in 23 years of military service. I wrote that 28 men are alive because you made a decision that no regulation could have anticipated and no commander could have ordered. I wrote that you identified a developing ambush that our intelligence missed, that you warned command twice and were dismissed twice, and that when the situation became catastrophic, you took the only action that could save lives. He paused. I also wrote that if Colonel Stone charges you, I'll resign my commission in protest, and so will every man who was in that gorge. Martinez spoke up from behind him. I've already told him the same thing. Brooks, too, the lieutenant said. Webb, Torres, Morrison, every single operator, they'll all testify, not just for you, for the principle. The principle that when a soldier sees her people dying and has the capability to save them, following a bad order isn't honor, it's cowardice. Elena's throat was tight. She looked at Martinez, who nodded once. At Brooks, who gave her a look that said everything his mouth couldn't. You won't need to resign, sir, she said. Whatever happens, I'd make the same decision again. I know you would. That's why I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. 3 hours later, Elena sat in a briefing room at Bagram in a fresh uniform, her bandaged hands resting on the table in front of her. Colonel Rebecca Stone sat at the head of the table, mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, the kind of face that had been making hard decisions for 30 years and showed every one of them. Around the table sat intelligence officers, tactical coordinators, senior enlisted personnel, and Commander Harrison. Captain Reynolds was there too, seated at the far end. He hadn't looked at Elena since she'd entered the room. Stone had spent 20 minutes listening to Harrison's verbal summary. When he finished, she sat in silence for a full 30 seconds. Elena counted. Captain Rodriguez, Stone said, intelligence assessment. Captain Maria Rodriguez opened a folder. Based on recovered equipment, surveillance data, and signals intelligence, we're estimating 230 to 250 enemy fighters participated in the ambush. The operation was planned over a minimum of 3 weeks. They pre-positioned military-grade communications jammers, established coordinated fire positions, constructed a kill zone specifically designed to neutralize a SEAL-sized element. This was sophisticated, ma'am, extremely sophisticated. And Lieutenant Price's impact? 30 confirmed enemy casualties directly attributable to her engagement. But the tactical significance goes far beyond body count. She eliminated their primary sniper, multiple squad and platoon leaders, at least 3 communications nodes, 2 mortar crews, 4 RPG teams, and their overall operational commander. Rodriguez paused. She systematically dismantled their command and control structure from a position they didn't know existed. Another pause. Our assessment is unequivocal, ma'am. Lieutenant Price's intervention was the decisive factor in the survival of the SEAL element. Without her actions, we would be writing 28 casualty notifications instead of sitting in this briefing. Stone turned to Reynolds. The captain's face was rigid. Captain Reynolds, you were tactical coordinator. Lieutenant Price reported staged village activity and hostile positions on the ridges. You dismissed both warnings. Your assessment now? Reynolds's jaw worked. The room was silent. Every eye was on him. I made an error in judgment, ma'am. The words came out like they were being pulled through broken glass. Lieutenant Price's tactical assessment was correct. She identified the ambush indicators that our intelligence platforms missed. I dismissed her concerns based on... He stopped, started again. Based on a lack of sensor confirmation. Based on a lack of sensor confirmation, Stone repeated, or based on a lack of confidence in the officer making the report. The question hung in the air like a blade. Reynolds's face reddened. He looked at the table, at his hands, at anywhere that wasn't Elena or Colonel Stone. "Both, ma'am," he said finally. "I did not give Lieutenant Price's assessment the weight it deserved. I allowed my assumptions about her capability to influence my tactical judgment. That was wrong, and it nearly killed 28 people." Stone held him in her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she turned to the room. "Anyone in this room want to recommend disciplinary action against Lieutenant Price for disobeying Captain Reynolds's order to maintain position?" Silence. Total, absolute silence. "I didn't think so." Stone pressed the intercom. "Send Lieutenant Price's personnel file to my office and get me division on a secure line. I need to discuss a commendation packet." She turned to Elena. "Lieutenant, I'm going to be direct with you because that's how I operate, and I think that's how you operate too." "Yes, ma'am. What you did was extraordinary. It was also completely outside the scope of your orders, your assignment, and arguably your authority. I could write you up. I won't, because regulations exist to serve the mission. And the mission that night was to bring those operators home alive. You accomplished that mission when no one else could." Stone slid a folder across the table. "This is your new assignment. Primary Sniper, Tier 1 Direct Action Team. You're done with reconnaissance backwater postings. We've been wasting you, Lieutenant, and that stops today." Elena opened the folder, read the assignment orders. Her hands were shaking, not from exhaustion this time, from something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 4 years of being overlooked and dismissed and told in 100 quiet ways that she didn't belong. "Ma'am, this is a Tier 1 billet." "Yes, it is. These positions are voluntary, high risk, high operational tempo. The question is whether you want it." "I accept, ma'am." "Good." Stone stood. Everyone in the room stood with her. "One more thing, Lieutenant. I want this engagement analyzed and incorporated into our tactical training curricula. The climbing route, the target selection methodology, the force multiplier prioritization, all of it. What you did on that cliff isn't just a war story. It's a new standard." Stone looked around the room. "And I want it made very clear throughout this task force that operational capability has nothing to do with physical size or the volume of someone's personality. We judge people on performance. Lieutenant Price just set the bar. I expect everyone to take note." She left. The room exhaled. Harrison walked Elena to the door. In the hallway, he stopped. "How are the hands?" "They hurt. They'll heal." He paused. "You know what Martinez told me this morning?" "What?" "He said he spent 3 deployments calling you Whisper like it was a joke. He said watching you work that ridge was like watching someone prove that everything he thought he knew about what makes a good operator was wrong." Harrison smiled slightly. "Word for word. He also said if anyone ever uses that nickname as an insult again, they'll answer to him personally." Elena didn't know what to say to that. For years, the nickname had been a weight she carried. A constant low-grade reminder that she didn't fit, didn't belong, wasn't enough. Hearing that it had changed meaning felt like setting down a rucksack she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Commander," she said, "what about Reynolds?" Harrison's expression hardened. "Stone's handling it. He won't be coordinating tactical operations anymore. He's being moved to a staff position where his judgment calls can't get people killed. He's not a bad officer. No, he's an officer who let his assumptions override his training. That's worse than bad, Elena. Bad officers make mistakes from ignorance. Reynolds made his from arrogance. He heard a woman he'd already decided wasn't worth listening to, and he stopped listening before her first sentence was finished. He won't be the last. No, he won't. But the next one will have this after-action report on his desk. And he'll have to explain why he ignored the same kind of warning that nearly wiped out a SEAL platoon in Shahikat Valley. They walked outside. The Afghan sun was brutal, white and heavy and relentless. Elena squinted against it. What now, sir? Now you heal. Your new team leader will contact you in 72 hours. Master Chief Derek Coleman. He runs a Tier 1 element, small team, high-end missions. He's read your file and my report. He asked for you specifically. He asked for me? By name? By name, Elena. 72 hours. Enough time for her hands to start healing, for her shoulders to unknot, for the adrenaline sickness to work its way out of her system. Enough time to call her father. She found a satellite phone that evening. The connection took 3 tries, bouncing signals off satellites halfway around the world to reach a house in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. When her father's voice came through, rough and warm and familiar, Elena had to press the phone hard against her ear to stop her hands from shaking. "Hey, Dad." Cass. A pause. He could hear something in her voice. He always could. What happened? She told him, not the classified details. She couldn't share those. But the shape of it, the ambush, the cliff, the shooting, the descent. She spoke for 20 minutes and her father listened the way he'd always listened. Completely, without interruption. Absorbing every word the way rock absorbs rain. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long time. "You climbed a Class 5 face in combat," Jack said. "In the dark, loaded." "The rock was terrible, Dad. Shale in the last section. The whole face was rotten. But you read it." "I tried." "You didn't try, Elena. You did it. 120 meters up, the shelf collapsed. You told me that. You fell. And you caught yourself on a hold the size of my fist. And you kept climbing." His voice was thick. "Do you understand what that means?" "It means I got lucky." "No, it means I raised a daughter who, when she's falling off a cliff in the dark with 28 lives depending on her, reaches out and grabs the rock instead of giving up. That's not luck. That's who you are." "Dad, I'm proud of you, not because of the medal they're going to give you or the stories people are going to tell. I'm proud because when it mattered, when it really mattered, you did what needed doing. That's all I ever tried to teach you. Just do what needs doing when it needs doing." "I was scared the whole time." "Of course you were. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's what courage actually is. Everything else is just recklessness." Elena pressed the phone against her ear. 14,000 miles of distance between them. Satellites and radio waves in the curve of the earth. And somehow her father's voice was the closest thing in the world. "Mom would be so proud," Jack said. "You were loud when it mattered most." Elena's throat closed. She couldn't speak. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, little one. Now get some rest. You sound like you haven't slept in a week." "Close. Then sleep. The mountains will still be there when you wake up." 3 weeks later, Elena stood on a range at Bagram, trying to shoot, trying and failing. Her hands had healed enough to grip the rifle. The bandages were gone, replaced by fresh pink scars that would fade to white over time. Her shoulders had unknotted. The pain was manageable now, controlled with ibuprofen and stubbornness. But something else was wrong. She'd loaded the rifle, settled into position, found a target at 400 meters. Simple, easy, the kind of shot she could make in her sleep. She'd placed the crosshair center mass, controlled her breathing, found the space between heartbeats, and then her hands started shaking. Not from injury, not from exhaustion, from something deeper, something that came from a place she couldn't control or reason with. She'd squeezed the trigger. The rifle had kicked. The bullet had gone wide, missing by almost a meter. Elena tried again. Same result. The shaking got worse. She set the rifle down, stared at her hands. They were trembling like she had hypothermia, even though the temperature was 100 degrees. "Lieutenant?" She looked up. Marcus was standing 10 meters away, watching her with concern written across his face. "I can't shoot," she said. The words came out flat, empty. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't shoot. I set up. I aim. And my hands shake. I can't control it." Marcus walked closer, knelt beside her. How long has this been happening? 3 days since I got cleared for range time. Have you talked to anyone? No. Elena, I killed 30 people, Marcus. The words came out hard, like stones. I can still see their faces, the ones close enough for me to see through the scope. I see them when I close my eyes, when I try to sleep, when I pick up the rifle. She looked at him. One of them was a kid, maybe 17, 18. I chose not to shoot him, let him run. But what if that was the wrong call? What if he comes back? You can't think like that. Why not? Because it's uncomfortable? Because it makes you question whether I should have been up there in the first place? Her voice was rising. She forced it back down. I'm not a hero, Marcus. I'm just broken. You're not broken. Then why can't I shoot? Marcus didn't have an answer for that. Elena stood up, left the rifle on the ground, walked back to the barracks. She refused to see anyone, refused to talk to Torres when the medic came to check on her, refused to meet Patterson when he got out of surgery and asked to see her. She sat alone in her quarters, staring at her hands, thinking about 30 faces. 30 people who'd been alive and now weren't because of decisions she'd made in fractions of seconds. The knock came on her third day of isolation. Go away, Elena said. The door opened anyway. An old man walked in, 64 years old, gray hair, face like weathered leather, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose joints didn't work as well as they used to, but refused to acknowledge it. Bull Garrett. How did you? Elena started. Marcus called me, kid smart, knew you needed someone who understood. Bull pulled a chair over and sat down. I heard what you did. I also heard you can't sleep. I'm fine. You're not fine, and lying about it doesn't help. Bull leaned forward. How many faces do you see? Elena looked at him, really looked at him. 30. How many do you remember clearly enough to describe? 11, the ones close enough to see details. Bull nodded. I see 43, from Vietnam, 1968 to 1971. 3 tours. I can tell you what 12 of them were wearing, what their expressions were, what the weather was like. He paused. That number doesn't go away, Elena. It becomes part of you. The question is whether you let it destroy you, or whether you figure out how to live with it. I let one go, Elena whispered. A kid, maybe 17, forced conscript. I had the shot. I didn't take it. Good. What if he comes back? What if not shooting him gets someone killed? What if shooting him would have made you into something you couldn't live with? Bull's voice was gentle. You made a choice based on the information you had and the person you are. That's all anyone can do. The fact that you're questioning it means you're human. The fact that it keeps you up at night means you have a conscience. He paused. Those are features, not bugs. I killed 11 people. I can see their faces. The overall commander, he looked surprised, like he couldn't believe someone had gotten a shot at him. I took that from him. His life, his future, everything. You saved 28 lives, including a kid named Foster who's 22 years old, a man named Patterson who has a 3-week-old daughter he's never held. You gave them their futures back. That doesn't make the other thing okay. No, it doesn't. Nothing makes it okay. That's the price, Elena. That's what you carry. The knowledge that you took lives to save lives. The weight of that decision. The faces in the dark. Bull leaned back. The military threw me away at 60, said I was useless, too old, past my prime. Then you came along. You took what I taught you and you did something I could never do. You climbed an impossible cliff and you saved 28 people with skills I gave you. He paused. You're not my student, Elena. You're my legacy. And legacies don't get to be broken. They get to be human. They get to struggle. They get to have nightmares and shaking hands and doubt. But they don't get to quit. Elena's eyes were burning. How do I fix this? You don't fix it. You work through it. One day at a time. One shot at a time. You learn to breathe through the shaking. You learn to sleep through the nightmares. You learn to carry the faces without letting them crush you. Bull stood up. And you let people help you. Torres, Marcus, Harrison, me. We're all here. We all understand. You're not alone in this. He walked to the door, stopped. One more thing. Tomorrow morning, 0600, meet me at the range. We're going to teach you how to shoot again. Not the way you did before, the way you need to now. With everything you're carrying. He left. Elena sat alone for a long time. Then she lay down on her bunk and closed her eyes. The faces were still there. All 30 of them. But Bull's voice was there too, telling her that being human wasn't a weakness, that questioning her choices didn't make her broken, that legacy meant carrying the weight and not letting it destroy you. She slept for 6 hours, the first real sleep she'd had in 3 weeks. 6 weeks after Shahikat Valley, Elena stood on a range at Bagram, Bull beside her. The sun was just coming up, painting the mountains gold. Load, Bull said. Elena loaded the rifle. Her hands were steady, not perfect, but steady enough. 800 meters, wind from the west, you know the drill. Elena settled into position, closed her eyes, listened, found the frequency, that low hum between 40 and 60 hertz, the sound Bull had taught her to hear when she was 15 years old. She opened her eyes, controlled her breathing, found the space between heartbeats, squeezed. The rifle kicked. 800 meters away, the bullet punched through the center of the target. There she is, Bull said quietly. Elena lowered the rifle, looked at him. Thank you. Don't thank me, you did the work. I just reminded you that you could. He paused. You ready for what comes next? I don't know. Good answer. Come on. You've got 5 female snipers waiting to meet you. Stone approved your training proposal. The Price-Garrett Auditory Wind Method. It's official now, part of the curriculum. Elena stared at him. They approved it? You climbed an impossible cliff and saved 28 lives with a technique nobody else has. Of course they approved it. Now you get to pass it on, just like I passed it on to you. They walked across the range. 5 women in uniform stood waiting. Young, nervous, hopeful. The way Elena had been when she was starting out. Before 4 years of being overlooked taught her to expect nothing. Lieutenant Price, the first one said, it's an honor, ma'am. Elena looked at them, saw herself in their faces, saw the hunger to prove themselves, the fear that they wouldn't be good enough, the weight of expectations they hadn't asked for but carried anyway. No, ma'am, Elena said, just Elena. Or Whisper if you prefer. The nickname used to be an insult. Now it's just who I am. She taught them for 3 hours, the technique Bull had given her. How to close your eyes and hear the wind. How to find the frequency. How to calculate for what you heard instead of what you saw. How to make impossible shots possible. They struggled at first, just like she had, but one of them, a woman named Sarah, 24 years old from Texas, closed her eyes and got very still and then opened them and fired. The bullet went exactly where she wanted it to go. How did you do that? Another woman asked. Sarah smiled. I listened. 2 days later, Elena got a message to report to the flight line. A helicopter was waiting. Master Chief Derek Coleman wanted to meet her. She showed up in fresh uniform, hands healed, shoulders functional. Mine still carrying 30 faces but learning how to live with them. Coleman was standing beside a Black Hawk, 58 years old, compact, gray-haired, moving with the economy of motion that came from decades of doing dangerous things efficiently. He saw her approaching and nodded. Lieutenant Price. Master Chief. You ready to do this? Do what, Master Chief? Join a team that doesn't care about your size or your volume or how long it takes people to notice you're in the room. A team that cares about one thing. Can you do the job when everything's on fire and the plan's gone to hell? Elena thought about that. Thought about a cliff in the dark. Thought about 30 shots. thought about 28 men who were alive because she'd done something everyone said was impossible. Yes, Master Chief, I can do the job. Good, get in. We've got work to do. 6 months later, Elena sat in the chow hall at Bagram, eating alone, not from loneliness, from preference. She'd always been comfortable with silence. A tray slid onto the table across from her. Jake Patterson sat down. He was walking with a prosthetic below his left knee, moving well, alive. Mind if I join you, Lieutenant? Of course not. They ate in silence for a minute. Then Patterson reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, showed her a picture. A baby girl, dark hair, big eyes, smiling. That's Maya Elena Patterson, 3 months old now. Elena stared at the picture. You named her after you, middle name. My wife wanted me to ask permission first, but I told her if you hadn't been on that cliff, I wouldn't be here to hold my daughter. Seemed like the least we could do. Elena couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. A baby girl in Virginia with her name. A life that existed because of 30 shots from a cliff that couldn't be climbed. Thank you, she finally managed. No, ma'am, thank you. That evening, Elena walked to the range one more time. Bull was there, teaching the 5 women. Sarah had just made a shot at 1,000 meters in 20-kilometer winds. Not bad, Bull was saying. Now do it again. Elena watched from a distance, watched her technique being passed on, watched Bull doing what he'd been meant to do all along. Teaching, building legacy, making the next generation better than the last. He saw her watching and smiled, nodded once. A gesture that said everything words couldn't. You did good. You proved them wrong. You found your voice. Elena nodded back. Then she turned and walked toward the operations building. Master Chief Coleman had a mission spinning up. 6-person element, high-end target. The kind of operation that would have been impossible for her 6 months ago. Now it was just Tuesday. The sun was setting behind the mountains. The same mountains that had almost killed her. The same country that had taught her what she was capable of when everything else was stripped away. She thought about her mother, about a hospital room 20 years ago, about a promise to be loud when it matters. She'd found when that was. Finally, after 20 years of searching. It was when 28 people needed her, and she was the only one who could reach them. It was when nobody believed something was possible, and she did it anyway. It was when the world tried to make her quiet, and she climbed a cliff and let 30 shots speak louder than any words ever could. They called her Whisper. But that night, from a cliff nobody believed could be climbed, that whisper had echoed through 30 shots. And every shot had said what words never could. I am here. I see you. And I will not let you die.